All right, welcome to Homegrown Health number 2. Um, this is the second in the series of 4 that we're planning. So the first one can be found on the CED Clinic YouTube channel. But here we go with session number 2. So here's a quick pic of my grow as it is right now in our little 2x4 tent here. So just to reiterate, what we're trying to accomplish in this series is to save you guys the research that you might want to do before you go about embarking on your first grow. So if you can understand everything that is in this series of 4, you should be well on your way. So this is for folks that maybe have that very introductory information, but maybe you're looking like you're getting ready to buy stuff and start growing. So what we want to do is just get you all the need to know information and get you on your way as quickly as possible. Okay, so a couple of notes from the last presentation. I said that you might want an hour per day. You can probably achieve everything in 30 minutes per day working on your grow. Even that might be a little high. A lot of what we're doing is checking in on the plants every day. Okay, so we talked about getting a medical card. That's also a good idea. Maybe if you're renting, it might be a way to better justify your grow to your landlord. This isn't legal advice, but it's a good thing to have. Also, if you can see the size of that jar that you might have there, having a medical card also helps in that aspect. So if you have a lot of flour around, or if you need to transport it for whatever reason, a medical card can be a good protection. So nobody questions you too much. Um, so we talked about we're not getting rich growing here, but it is going to, your investment is going to be returned depending on your rate of consumption. And everything should cover its, should pay for itself within about a year or less. We did talk about spending $500 to $1,000 on all of your gear, but this can all be purchased in stages. So you can spend maybe a couple $100 at a time or less. And what I'm going to do here in the next week following the publishing of this presentation on YouTube, you guys will be able to see what items you want to buy at what stage in your grow, so you can know that you'll have the boxes checked before you get there without having to buy everything all at once. So you can take the time to research a little more and get the money together. Okay, so we talked about indoor versus outdoor. This is all indoor. Timeline, you want to give yourself 5 to 7 months plus another month to cure your plants. So we don't want to rush things here. So you want to have your plants in a nice location where there's good temperature and humidity. We talked about vegetative growth versus flower stages. Looking at males versus females, we want the female plants. I have a detailed guide on how to germinate seeds again in that first video. So CED Clinic, YouTube, How to Grow series. Check out the first video. And then we talked about what you can expect for yield. It's going to be roughly 50 grams per square foot. That's going to be a good goal. You may get more like 30 grams per square foot. That's more what I'm getting right now because I'm doing some experimentation with some different kind of lower yielding plants, but we'll take a look at that later. Okay, so we talked about what we covered in part 1. Now in number 2, we're going to be going in depth a little bit more about seed selection, so you can start selecting your seeds after this video. We'll talk about your water quality quickly, and then we'll talk about parts of the plant as well as hermaphrodites. And then we'll talk about what kind of strategies you can employ during the vegetative growth that will give us a nice setup for flower later. So the next webinar is going to have all of the gear that I recommend and purchase and where to buy them. And we'll talk about how to operate that gear to get your plants dialed in nicely. And then we'll think about what kind of nutrients you want, as well as flipping the flowers. So we're kind of Each part goes through a different segment of your grow, as well as a different segment that you need to know. So number 3 is flipping the flower there. And then after that, we're going to talk about common issues in part 4, advanced topics. And then as far as the plant stage, we're also going to talk about harvesting, drying, and curing, when to chop your plant down, all the fun stuff. Okay, so we have a quick note here on water quality. This is just something you want to think about before you start growing. Most water in the United States is going to have either chlorine or chloramine. So what you want to do is look up your town's water report and see which one you have. If you have just chlorine, that's a gas, so it can evaporate over about 8 hours if you're watering your plants with a couple of gallons of water. If you have chloramine, you're going to want a product like the one pictured here. The dechlorinator, it binds to the chlorine and basically deactivates it. And the reason why we don't want these chlorine or chloramine is it's going to kill the microbes that are in our soil. So it's going to slowly sterilize our medium. And we'll talk about why we don't want that. We also want to talk about the water quality that your water report might mention. Your total dissolved solids, you're going to want them to be 250 parts per million or below. And if you're not certain about what that number might be, a lot of times your town will have somebody in charge of water quality, in charge of water filtration. A lot of times they're listed on the water report or on your municipality's website, so just give it a Google. So especially if you're on well water, you may want to measure the amount of total dissolved solids yourself. So I have a Hano Labs EC meter, they call them. So you want to just take a quick measurement of the water that you're planning to use to water your plants, and you want it to be 250 parts per million or below. And we'll talk about why. If you cannot stay below that 250 number, what you want to do is filter your water in one way or another, or if that's not possible, you can always use bottled water. If you want to get some of those 5-gallon jugs delivered. It's a little, wasteful in regard to plastic, but, we can talk about different solutions. Okay. Okay, so here we can see if you had a healthy concentration of solids in your water, your roots are happy and able to exchange nutrients in the soil back and forth between the root and its surroundings. But if you have too much junk in your water, too much total dissolved solids, what's going to happen is through osmosis, the water is going to be sucked out of your root. Also, if your numbers are maybe more like 300 parts per million, what might happen is your root can uptake water, but it's going to build up junk outside of the root. And you're going to have things like bicarbonates potentially build up around the root hair. And that will cause problems that will be difficult to diagnose down the line. Okay, so there's a quick note on water quality, and we'll talk about parts of your plant. You've got your seed. So when you popped your seed, like we discussed last webinar, it's going to activate enzymes. And then on one end of the seed, you're going to get your taproot first, and that'll anchor itself in the soil. And then the first set of leaves actually exist within the seed as well. And they're called cotyledons, and these are these round guys here. As your plant grows, they'll eventually yellow and drop as your serrated leaves get going. Okay. Then when your plant gets a bit bigger, you're going to have these fan leaves, and that's what you're going to see during vegetative growth. So obviously they perform photosynthesis. But they also, so during photosynthesis, you're generating sugars, and the leaves also store sugars. So you also want to think of more leaves being more of a reservoir of plant food. within them. So it's a good idea to keep track of your leaves and not to pull too many of them off. Then we have sugar leaves. So once you start the flowering phase, you're going to have your bud, and then you're going to have sugar leaves that come off the bud. They're called sugar leaves because they have trichomes on them, and you can see here that they look like they have a little bit of a crystalline dusting on them. Those are really trichomes, which we'll talk about. And then on the top of your plant, your biggest buds on the top, we call them colas. That's not a technical term, but it's a term that you'll see used often. So you have colas as opposed to maybe what we might call popcorn buds on the bottom. We want to maximize growth in the colas on the top and kind of minimize the smaller buds on the bottom. Okay, on a more of a micro level, on the leaf, we have the stomata. So these are pores in the leaf that enable gas exchange. So if your plant is doing well, your pores are going to be open as much as possible, and they're going to exchange gas for you. Okay, so we'll talk about parts of the bud here. When we're looking up close at a bud, we've got different kinds of parts going on. So the main component of the bud is going to be your bract that you can see here. A bract, it's really a modified leaf, and it protects the flowering portion of the plant. So we have pistils on the flowering portion of the plant, and those receive pollen and will turn them down the line into seeds. And then we have glandular trichomes. So this is where, so we know that the bud contains a majority of the cannabinoids, maybe 80% in the whole plant. And then those buds are what we're after. And then within the buds, the even more concentrated area of cannabinoids are going to be on the trichomes of the plant. So this is where the cannabinoids are stored, and they are on the outside of the buds. And if you take a close look, they look a little bit like stalks with a little ball on top. And that is going to be what we're after here. And if you were a hash maker, that would be where the hash comes from, is just, we would take those trichomes and kind of smush them together, heat them up, turn them into a glob, and that's how you get hash. So we want a lot of those trichomes, and that's what we're after when we're growing. Okay, so we'll talk about plant metabolism here. So the plant, you can think of as, like you're driving a car. So you have inputs and you have ways of controlling them, and then you have outputs with your metabolism. So obviously, to perform photosynthesis on the leaves, we have light and carbon dioxide going into the leaf, and then coming out, we have oxygen. So we know how that works. You want, in terms of light, you want about 50 watts per square foot of LED draw. And that's going to be one potential bottleneck that you want to remove. So we want plenty of light. CO2 in and O2 out. The way that we can maximize that is going to be by increasing the airflow to our plant. That's both the light and the CO2 are a reason why outdoor plants are going to tend to be larger. So those plants are getting that sort of high octane fuel, like they're really a race car outside. But because they are, say driving so fast and taking up so much gas, you have to make sure to supply them with a lot of gas and make sure that we're keeping careful control of the plant because our metabolism is so quick, it's digesting things so quickly. We want to make sure that we're not shorting the plant on nutrients or something like this, because then your car is going so fast it might go out of control. So that's something to think about. CO2, some hydro growers like to enrich CO2. So you might see like a large tank of CO2 and some monitoring equipment. We're not going to talk about that here, but that's just a fun thing to think about. And then, so also in the roots, just like in the leaves, we have inputs and outputs. So we take in water, of course, but we also take in oxygen. So it's important to make sure that your roots don't get too much water, or else they cannot receive enough oxygen. And you want to make sure that your soil is not compacted, or else it also cannot exchange gases and oxygen. Now the roots actually put things out as well. They put out sugars and hydrogen ions, and that's how they interact with the soil in the case of the hydrogen ions, and microbes in the soil in the case of sugars. So this is a close-up of our roots. So what we're doing is we're doing a lot of this nutrient uptake at the root hairs. So these are down to the size of 1 cell thick. So you have to be very careful with your roots and try not to disturb them. That's why we try to be gentle when we're doing things like transplanting. So we'll take a brief aside and talk about root symbiosis. So the root is putting out these sugars, and these sugars are traded with microbes in the soil called mycorrhizal fungus, as well as we have beneficial bacteria. So both of these serve the purpose to, they take in sugars, and in exchange, they bring nutrients to the plant from throughout the soil. So we can see in this photo here, this cross section. If you had a root that did not have mycorrhizal fungus, it's only able to take in nutrients that are in direct contact with the root. But if you introduce mycorrhizal fungus, it's the mycorrhizal fungus form a network throughout the soil. And they're structured similar to roots, but they're a lot finer, and they're a lot faster growing, and they're a lot more active. So they take in nutrients along this network, and they pass it along to the plant so that they can get fed by the plant in the form of sugars. So what that means is, just you'll see on the gear list in the next presentation that I recommend getting some mycorrhizal inoculant. And this will actually infect your roots with this mycorrhizal fungus that will also colonize your soil. So what it does is it helps the roots grow, helps the plant eat, and it helps you take in nutrients through the full volume of that pot, through that network. So it's a complicated system, but we can very easily take advantage of it by just sprinkling a little bit of mycorrhizal inoculant into the soil before we plant and before we transplant. We also can make use of beneficial bacteria. So we have a lot of microbes in a bottle these days. For an example, there's a product called Mammoth P that you can look up, and that helps provide phosphorus to the plant. So right next to the root, you can see here there's a phosphorus depleted zone. But if we introduce mycorrhizae, or we introduce something like Mammoth P, it'll help deliver more phosphorus to the plant when we're, say, in flower. So if you did sprinkle in some of this mycorrhizal inoculant, it will actually, in cannabis, will go within the cell and colonize. So its fungal hyphae will get within the root. And if you were within, say, a forest, what would happen is you'd have a fungus that we know breaks things down, like a rotting log or some leaf litter. And then it would colonize the soil, and then it would make its way into our plant. So it's bringing nutrients from decomposing things, or in this case, just our potted soil, and it'll bring it into our plant in exchange for the sugars that our plant creates when it photosynthesizes. Okay, so we'll get into some seed selection tips. So we want consistent seeds. So you can buy seeds, for an example, that are Gorilla Glue X Purple Oracle or whatever. But what that's going to give you is something with 50% average genetic consistency, just like two people that are siblings. And that can be fun, but it's kind of like popping Pokemon cards. You're going to get a few really vibrant seeds, and you're going to get a few that are kind of runts and not as good. So what we want to do is we want to get consistent seeds that we know are going to be that pure Gorilla Glue and are not going to be a random mix of things, because we have our little tent. We don't want to waste space. We don't want to take a gamble on big yielders and small yielders. We want a consistent crop. Um, when you buy seed packs from a seed bank, they're sold in packs of the same genetic line when you get your little package of seeds. But what we want to do when we're researching our seeds is we want to look for terms like um, inbreeding, inbred line, back crossing, and self-pollinating. And we're also going to see terms like filial generation. So what I'm going to advise is that you buy something that's marked F4 through F7, filial generation of seeds. And what that means is that within this line, if you take it for example, golden retrievers, we're not taking golden retriever and poodle and getting a random mix of children. We're taking golden retriever and other golden retrievers and breeding them. And then with that population, we're selecting these and breeding them again, so that we know we're always going to have really uh, good golden retrievers like that we're looking for, instead of some random assortment. So when these are filial generations, and when you see the marking F1, F2, F3, those are the first three layers of this. But what I'm going to advise is that you buy things that are on the F4 through F7 layer here of filial generations. So that's going to get you, it's going to really guarantee that what you're getting are true to the genetic line, and you're really going to get that Gorilla Glue. You're not going to get some inconsistency there. Okay, we'll take an aside on hermaphrodites here. So we have two ways that cannabis can show hermaphrodism. The first is a true hermaphrodite. That would be if you truly have both male and female parts. And you'll see that on the pre-flower phase. So after you flip the flower, you'll start to see female parts, which you can see on the left here, have um, have the ability to take in pollen through these hairs here. But you also see pollen sacs, and you'll say, okay, I'm consistently seeing two different types of things throughout the plant. I'm seeing these female parts, and I'm also seeing these male pollen sacs. That will be something that's very rare, but if you think that you're seeing it, it's time to start being suspicious at that point and think about killing your plant there, because we don't want those male pollen sacs that it's producing. So these female parts are a little bit more teardrop shaped. They are closer to the base of the plant, and they have these hairs that come out eventually. The male parts are going to be, they're going to have a little bit of a stalk to them, and then they're going to be more round with a bit of a point, but they're going to be more round. And we can feel free to contact me. I'm HoneyBearGrows on Instagram if you have questions on identifying. But you want to really get in there on your plant when you flip the flower and really take a good look and make sure that you don't have any question about it. That is very rare, that said. So the second case we have are intersex plants. So this is going to be much more likely what you might see if you may have been stressing your plant, or if you've been exposing it to potential light leaks. So we talked about how photoperiod plants require 12 hours or more of a dark cycle when they're flowering, right? Now, if you interrupt that dark cycle with what we call a light leak, you've opened the tent, you've shined a light in there, some LEDs from like a fan or something are shining on your light, on your plants. they're going to get confused because they'll say, hey, this is supposed to be my night period when I'm going through these hormonal changes. And now it's goofing up the hormones of the plant. And you're going to see the plant get confused. And because there's some hormonal confusion going on, you'll start to see male anthers within your buds. So we can see on the right of this picture here, we have these yellow male parts. People call them bananas because they're kind of long and yellow and they grow inside your bud. So you want to inspect your bud for these, and pollen actually grows in there. So that's how sometimes growers can say, I don't know what I did wrong. I got feminized seeds. I have female plants, but I ended up with seeds within my buds, and that really reduced my potency. I don't know what I did wrong. So oftentimes that's due to light leaks. It can also be due to undependable genetics. So that's another reason why we want to look for that F4 through F7 filial generation. Because if we have undependable genetics, that can mean that the plant may, in addition to not being a high yielder, it may have problems with being undependable and may react more negatively to stress than a normal cannabis plant might. Um, so so that's going to be something we want to watch out for when we're more well into flower and we've got buds going. Okay, so my seed guidelines, we saw this slide on the first presentation, but to reiterate, we want our feminized seeds, not what they call regular seeds. We want photoperiod plants, not what they call autoflowers. Now, I'm growing autoflowers so that you guys can see a plant growing very quickly, but the reason we want photoperiods is that they can be held in the vegetative growth stage before we um, decide to flip them to flower so that you have time to recover from any, say, nutrient deficiencies or any issues that you might have as a beginner grower. So that'll really keep the training wheels on so that no potential issues happen. With autoflowers, you have a set amount of time. And then if you make a mistake, you're kind of left with that and you'll really see that impact your final yield in flower. Also, we do not use bag seed. We talked about genetics a little bit. We have this concept of heritable hermaphrodism. So, with bag seed, how you got the bag seed is the grower that you got your buds from had a hermaphroditic plant, most likely, or a male because they're just not on top of their grow. And what that means is that that seed that you got has parentage of hermaphrodites. So we don't want to start introducing a known hermaphroditic genes within your own grow. So it's not really worth the cost savings there, the risk. We want that F4 through F7 filial generations. And then we're going to have you guys pop seed. We don't want to, and you're going to purchase the seed. We don't want to accept clones from other people because clones can oftentimes have bugs or viruses or other issues that are present on those clone plants. And you'll introduce that into your grow, and that's not a good way to start out. So you can accept clones from me. I personally think my clones are pretty well taken care of, but still, you should vet them out. You should take a close look at them, ensure that the person you trust, and we're not going to do clones in this series. Okay. So some more seed selection details. So I will leave the selection of effect or cannabinoids up to you. You know what kind of buds you like and what you don't. But sometimes you can see that folks have posted test results for their strains. That's going to be an optimistic number. On your first grow, you're not going to hit it out of the park, most likely. So if they're saying that they got 28% THC, maybe you'll get like 20%, let's say. Okay. So what we want to do is a lot of research. So you guys want to be looking online for yourself. So you want to be looking on forums, looking on Instagram, and you want to confirm that other people have grown the seed successfully. And you want to be pairing the seeds, the strain, with the seed bank. Because if you want to be getting Northern Lights, which is a good strain I recommend for beginners, that Northern Lights from a seed bank on the West Coast might be different from the Northern Lights grown from a seed bank on the East Coast, because people might be experiencing genetic drift in the strains on either sides of the country because of prohibition, or you might have a slightly different phenotype. Somebody might be growing buds that are purple, but somebody else might be growing buds that aren't. So there's a lot of confusion in the strain names. So a good way to lock that in when you're reading reviews and really know about what you're getting is to pair the strain and the seed bank. So you say Northern Lights from Dutch Passion, and you'll know that these are the kind of genetics that we're looking at. Um, so you want to look for things that are marked as easy for beginners. I mean, why not if you are a beginner? And we want a good fast cycle, maybe like 70 days to flower. And we want to see it saying something like 7 or 8 weeks flower time. So you can veg as for as short or as long as you want. You can flip your light cycle with a light timer to be that 12 hours on and 12 hours off dark cycle. Um, but then after that, that flowering time is going to be genetic dependent, so that the buds are going to take X number of weeks to ripen before you harvest. So that's going to kind of determine your schedule. Folks also say that, we have really fast growth or we don't, or things like this. Like, let's say, for an example, a landrace strain, a long flowering sativa might not be what you want, because you could spend, a whole a whole summer just waiting for these buds to produce. And that's not quite as fun, and you may end up with a plant that's super tall. Speaking of which, you want to think about the structure that you're going to get of your plant. So you want to be looking for people posting pictures of the buds that they're getting off the plant, pictures of the colas, the top buds of the plant before they chop it. Those should probably be like 2 inches plus in diameter. You should be getting some large colas if people are proud of their grow. Not too much of the small buds on the bottom, because that can be annoying to process and trim and deal with later. And you want to note the height of the plant. So if people are saying this is an extraordinarily tall plant that's good for outdoor, that's not going to be what you want, because your plants, you'll see, can get pretty tall. And we have a limited amount of space in our tent after you take the height of the pot and some headspace for the lights. So I would shoot for something that they're saying is maybe like 4 feet high or something like that. But you're in control as far as the veg goes. So we have an unfortunate situation with seed banks. I am recommending that you purchase from seed banks. I would have recommended that you actually go to some trade shows to buy seeds in person if that's possible, because that's always a fun experience and you get freebies and stuff. But we're not doing that this year, of course. So what you want to do ideally is buy directly from the breeder if that's possible and they have a good system going on. So let's see. Some breeders that I recommend, by the way, are going to be, we have Mass Medical Strains here in Massachusetts. That's one that I'm growing out. Humboldt Seed Company is good, Dutch Passion, CSI Humboldt, Seattle Chronic Seeds. I'll also post this on the Google Doc that I'll give you a link for at the end. So what you want to do first is you want to find your breeder that you like. You want to find the strain that they have that you like, and then you want to make sure that the seed bank carries it. Now, the seed banks, you're going to vet out purely as like a consumer, the way you would any other online shopping store. You want to make sure that they take payment in a reasonable way. You want to see reviews of the place and make sure that people like them. And I would say that unless you really, really want to, don't buy seeds from abroad because you're running into things like customs and just unnecessary legal risk. Um, so I would shoot to make sure that your seeds are within the United States, your seed bank. Um, we'll take one recommendation of folks I like, for an example, is ILGM. So they, I believe, breed their own seeds as well as sell their own seeds. So these guys have a germination guarantee. So that means they'll say maybe like either 100% of your seeds are guaranteed to produce a little plant or like 80% plus. And you can get on email or Instagram or on the phone with them, and you can speak with them and say, hey, some of my seeds didn't pop, and they'll send you out new ones, so that they can kind of maintain a positive reputation with the community. Uh, so there's also the payment issue. They also accept credit card, Venmo, stuff like that. You'll see a lot of these folks uh, only accept payment in kind of weird ways that I don't really like sending cash through the mail, which is sort of crazy, as well as Bitcoin, which is a lot of work if you're not into Bitcoin. Um, so that'll be something you want to see in their frequently asked questions. They'll talk about we accept payment in this way. Um, you also want to look up reviews of just the seed banks. So you want to make sure that other folks have bought from them and had a good experience. Maybe people will complain like, I had a bad germination rate. These seeds must have been super old or damaged or something. Or maybe they didn't, customer service wouldn't replace my seeds and stuff like that. We have well-grown seeds in Massachusetts. So they don't have a germination guarantee, but if you email them or get at them on Instagram, they will try to replace your seeds. So that's the kind of thing that you'll see in a review, is if their customer service is willing to work with you in case something goes bad. Um, let's see. I have used Seeds for Me. They're decent and they accept Venmo, but they don't have a germination guarantee. So that was an issue I ran into. I was trying to pop seeds for this webinar, but one of them didn't pop, so I ended up having to buy a whole new pack. It wasn't a great experience. Seeds Here Now is decent in these other categories, but they don't accept credit card or Venmo. So you have to pay with cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, which is it's too much work. Um, all right, let's proceed. Okay, so we'll talk about the vegetative stage of your plant growth here. So we're going to talk about strategies for veg. So in veg, what you want to do is you want to grow your plants to fill the horizontal space and to get as many leaves going on so they can absorb all of the light. So we talked about there's this bottleneck of lit area. So within the tent, so I have a 2 foot by 4 foot tent. So I have 8 square feet of lit area, and I want to fill all of that with leaves because otherwise I'm wasting light, which is, light costs money. And then I'm also not filling that space with productive plant growth. I'm not filling the space with buds at the end of the day. So what we want to do in veg is we want to grow the plant up to fill the space, take in all those photons of light, and then turn all those photons into buds down the line. We don't necessarily want a tall plant. What we want is a plant that's maybe a foot and a half tall before we flip the flower. And then the plant will stretch during the flower. So there's not necessarily a reason to have your plant be so tall during veg, because you can just lower your lights to get closer to the plant. You can bring your lights down. I have them on a little pulley mechanism that I'll put in the gear list. But we do want the horizontal growth and nice, healthy, big leaves. Let's see. So one way that we can try to do that a little bit faster is by topping our plant. So what you do is when your plant is pretty small here, you're going to, and it's got just 4 sets of leaves, you're going to nip the top off there very carefully and cleanly. And what that does is it causes, instead of one single vertical growth, we have two, which are a little bit more of a horizontal growth coming out the side. So it makes our plant a little bit wider and bushier. So you can see in these photos, if you didn't top the plant, you would just get one tall cola, and it's getting, the one tall cola gets the light, but the rest of the short guys down here don't get so much light because your light intensity is going to decrease with the square of the distance. So those guys on the bottom are not really making good use of the light, and they're kind of struggling. Whereas if you top the plant, you get that branching that we talked about, and you're going to get a lot of leaves coming out to the side, and it's going to be more horizontal growth, and you'll get more colas throughout. Now, you don't want to overdo the topping, because what you're doing is subdividing those tops more, and then you'll end up with just a lot of small colas. So personally, I recommend just doing it once. So what topping does on a technical level is we have hormones in the top of the plant, and those hormones suppress the side branches from growing too much. But if you remove the top and the hormones contained therein, your side branches are no longer going to be suppressed, and they'll race to be the new tops. Okay, so we get a more symmetrical, wide kind of growth going on. So just in detail, again, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 sets of leaves. We're going to remove that fourth set, that little growth there. And then that will, in the end, give us at least 4 main colas or more, depending on how your plant grows. The downside is that when you do this, it stresses the plant. So you only want to do it in veg. You'll never do it in flower, of course, because you would be removing buds. And I only recommend doing it once. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to give you maybe about a week or so of extended growth in veg, because you would have, it essentially slows your plant down by about a week's worth of growth, because you've stressed the plant a little bit. You've hurt it, so it has to recover for about a week. But then after that, it's all ready to go. So here's some more examples here. On the left, this guy will get, on the far left of the tape measure here, this plant will get decent yield, and it looks like a nice plant. But the one on the right is going to be way better and easier to deal with. So yeah, just up close, we're going to do this when the plant is pretty young, right? So when it's only got 4 sets of leaves, it's still pretty small. It might be like maybe 5 inches tall or so, give or take. And then you very carefully would take some scissors and some clean, very pointy scissors to nip those off. And it's just the topmost growth. If you take another set of leaves off, that's fine if you feel more comfortable doing that, but it'll just mean that the plant will have more material removed, and it'll be a little more stressed. But anyway, at the end of the day, you can see where this cut occurred, and then you can see that these 2 side branches were ready to go, and they just took off after a couple of weeks here. Okay, we have an alternative to topping. So topping is going to be my primary recommendation because it's simple, it's one and done. But we have an alternative here. If we can't stomach the loss of 1 week of veg time, you can also do, or you're scared to damage your plant with topping, you can do what's called low stress training. And there's 2 main ways of low stress training. Low stress meaning we didn't stress out our plant, we're just bending it in a way that manipulates those side branch suppressing hormones in a different way. So you can see here what this guy's done is he's got a pretty small plant, but this is your end product when it goes to flower here. So what you're doing is just like a bonsai gardener would. You're taking your plant when it's at its 3rd set of leaves and it's still pretty small, and you're bending it downward using a tie. And that tie usually is going to be anchored to the side of your pot because it's a good anchor point. So You can buy specific plant ties. It's like a wire with like kind of a thicker rubber coating so that it doesn't damage your plant. You can buy those in hydro stores, and then you would just attach it on one end, loop it around your plant, and the other end, loop it around a binder clip, which you can clip onto the side of your pot. And it makes it easy to adjust and move the binder clip around over time. Um, so LST, low stress training, is also going to give us more top colas, but it's without stressing the plant. So instead of removing that top apical meristem, that top growth, what you're doing is bending it down. And when it's below the level of our side branches, it's the hormones that suppress the side branch growth are going to no longer um, be within that top growth, and it's going to allow the side branches to grow out, as this guy's done here. So he's taken the top, he's bent it down below the level of the rest of the growth. So what you do is when you've got your third set of leaves, you anchor your plant down when it's just a seedling, and then the side branches will grow out. And then what you'll do is you'll do that again. So you'll bend your plant down, you'll anchor it, and then the new tops will grow out, and you'll take those and anchor them down again. So what happens is your plant is growing up and you're anchoring it down in a circle as you proceed, and you end up with your main trunk looking like a spiral as it goes up. So LST is something that you're going to do throughout veg, is adjusting these ties so that they kind of maintain that nice spiral shape of the plant. Let's see. So the downside, though, is that you have to kind of maintain these ties as the plant grows, and you have to kind of adjust them. So you'll have to apply multiple ties over time, as well as adjusting the height and the position of them. Okay. LST is also not as symmetrical, so it doesn't look quite as nice. Okay, so LST with a screen of green, so using a net here, is going to be a little bit of a lower maintenance solution. So it provides those same benefits where you're basically getting your plant to grow more horizontally and less like a Christmas tree, like we saw in that other image. So what we're doing is you have your tent, and you will zip tie this netting that's sold at hydro stores. You'll zip tie this net in one layer just evenly across your tent. And then what will happen is as your leaves and branches grow up to the level of the net, you can tuck them underneath or into the net. And then instead of continuing to grow up beyond the net, they'll just grow out and sideways. So we achieve that vertical growth we need up to a set level, and then we'll proceed out horizontally and fill the tent so that we take in all of those photons of light. So then when you're looking at your trellis net, you can see that it's basically 75% of the squares are filled with plant, with like leaves and branches and such. You'll say, okay, now it's time to flip the flower. And then the flowers will proceed above the level of that net here. So you can see on the bottom, this guy has some like a wooden frame for his trellis netting. And then after he's flipped the flower, the flowers went above the net. So one problem with it is that you have to, when it comes to harvest, you're going to trim, you're going to be chopping the colas off from the plant, but they're going to be kind of tangled up in your net because you were weaving your plant into it. So you can't really pop your plant out and chop things out, or like if you want to inspect for bugs throughout the growth period, you can't inspect your plants as easily, take them out of the tent, take a close look. You kind of have like a bit of a jungle that you have to weave through. But I don't think that's too big of an issue for you guys. And I would definitely consider a combination of topping and then letting your plant grow into a trellis net, because it just is a simple and easy way to get that horizontal growth going on. Okay. It also achieves a nice even canopy as well. So I mentioned earlier, your light level is going to decrease very rapidly with distance. So if you keep everything even, everybody gets the same amount of light intensity, and nobody gets too high and gets too much light and gets burned, and nobody is too low and is struggling like if they're kind of a runt plant. They won't be struggling with too little light. So if everybody's even, it's a lot easier for them to take in the light. Okay, so there's some more strategies here around plant count. So if we want to fill this this horizontal area of space in your tent or your closet or your grow room, there are a couple of strategies. So on the one hand, you can plant many plants within the area in what we call a sea of green. You can see here this guy planted tons and tons of plants, and you can see why it's called a sea of green here. So he could veg them out for a very short amount of time and then let them go. So he saved time in the veg period, but he lost his own time because it's a lot of labor to plant so many zillions of plants. And the more plants you have, the more that you have to keep an eye on, is this guy in the corner having an issue? Is this guy getting enough light? Is this guy having a nutrient deficiency? Is this guy having a bug? So it's a lot more to keep track of the more pots you have, and the more plants. Um, but if you're trying to produce for cultivation or something, that might be a good strategy. What I'm going to recommend to you guys is having a few bigger plants. So having maybe 3 or 4 plants. Let's go for 4. Um, if one of them dies, you'll still have 3, so you have some backup. 4 plants is a good in either a 4x4 or a 2x4 tent or a closet, of that's about 2 feet by 4 feet. Um, so you're going to have to veg these plants out longer because they're going to take longer to fill the horizontal space. But no big deal, right? We're going slowly and carefully here. But you can have bigger plants, which means that you'll have fewer but bigger buds to harvest, which is always nice and fun because you get cool big buds, as well as like trimming is less work. You don't have to keep track of so many plants. You don't have to water so many plants, pay attention to all their issues. It keeps things a little easier for you guys. All right, so going on with veg strategies, we want to think about transplanting our plants. So we're going to start our seedlings in a little cup. So oftentimes folks take a solo cup or something, a plastic cup. They'll fill it with soil, grow the plant up until you kind of see the roots coming out of the bottom. And so you'll have little holes that you cut in the bottom of the plant. A lot of folks will take a lighter and just burn little holes, drainage holes on the solo cup. If you're having trouble with that, just hit me up on Instagram, HoneyBearGrows. So oftentimes you start in a cup and then you'll proceed to a 2-gallon container, which is about this big. This plant right here is in a 2-gallon container inside of this ceramic. It's in a 2-gallon container, so you can get an idea of the size. And then after that, we'll go to our final pot, which is usually like 3 to 5 gallons. I would say go for maybe 5 gallons. We like to use a fabric pot, which is what you can see here. So the reason for that is it prevents root binding, and also allows airflow and for moisture to wick out. So I recommend these pot sizes and a method of careful transplanting because if your pot is too large and you water your pot, it's going to take too long for the moisture to wick out. And that's a really big problem with cannabis plants. Every single beginner overwaters their plants. We basically overlove them. So if we keep the pot size reasonable, it'll allow the moisture to wick out of the sides of that fabric pot in a faster way. It also allows oxygen to come into the roots. So if you had a 10-gallon pot and a little seedling, the oxygen won't be able to get through the soil to your root system. So you want to keep an appropriately sized pot there. Okay, so um, let's see. What you want to do is be transplanting your plants when the leaves are beginning to extend well beyond the bounds of your pot. So you can see if we're growing tomatoes, like this guy is just coming up to getting ready for transplanting. Um, Maybe soon he'll want to think about transplanting to the final pot. Um, Oh, fabric pots also prevent root binding. So if you take a pot in a nursery, you take a pot out of its plastic um, housing there, you're going to see oftentimes the roots circling the pot because they'll think they're within the ground and they'll continue to grow outward in a circle and look for water and nutrients. But what they're doing is as they coil around, they'll strangle themselves. But roots naturally, if they grew up to the surface, they would stop growing, right? So when they encounter air, when they encounter air, they're going to stop searching. They're going to stop growing. So if you have a fabric pot, it's going to encounter air through the fabric pot and stop growing. So that helps us keep things in a manageable space for our roots. Okay, so for you guys, uh, we have a partner video on CED Clinic presented by Sneaky Sasquatch. He went over simple hydro grows. I'm not a hydro grower. It's not really my thing. I kind of think I avoid the kind of nutrient systems that are involved with that, as well as the a lot of the electronics that you rely on. Hydro is a great way for really big yields. So a lot of times if you see a huge plant in a tiny pot, it's going to be a hydro system. And they kind of have eliminated the bottlenecks of, um, of water requirements for your plant, nutrient requirements, and air oxygen requirements for the roots. So it's really cool, but it's not my thing because I think it relies too heavily on these kind of systems. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but it seems like, you know, if your systems go wrong, it can put you in a pickle. So I don't mind growing in soil. I also kind of prefer the natural flavor that we get. So as cannabis growers at home, one of the things that we can get from our buds that you can't get in a dispensary oftentimes are going to be the natural kind of flavors that come from the soil. So as those soil microbes interact with your plant and they provide the nutrients the plant has asked for through that exchange we talked about earlier, your plant is going to be able to uptake and develop flavors that are more true to the genetic expression of the plant. Um, so you will definitely get dank buds out of a hydro system, but if you were to compare side by side, in my opinion, I feel like soil grown plants taste a bit better. And I appreciate the partnership with the microbes that we have going on. So that's going to be a fun thing for you guys to see that you wouldn't be able to get out of most dispensaries. So because most dispensaries are growing through hydroponic salt-based nutrient systems. So I grow in cocoa coir. So it's a shredded coconut husk. It's a byproduct of the coconut industry. It doesn't have any nutrients or organisms on its own, but it has a really great way of allowing airflow to pass through it. And it also has some capacity to hold nutrients onto its surface. So I take that coconut coir and I mix it with other things like worm castings. I use down to earth BioLive, dry amendment, and I also use some things like biochar and also other amendments. I'll publish my cocoa soil recipe in the documents, and you guys can get in touch with me to get that recipe on Instagram. Um, okay, so we also have other options for soil. So Most likely, if you guys don't use my recipe, a lot of folks like either an engineered soil or a super soil. An engineered soil is like a mix that you would buy, a soil mix. For an example, you might have like a raised bed engineered soil. You might have um, a potting mix engineered soil, etc. So these are going to be a soil that was mixed to a recipe. So a lot of times they'll have peat moss for water retention, perlite to allow for adequate drainage, which is something that we like. They might have worm castings for nutrition, or maybe some guano for nutrition, dolomite lime to balance the pH, and to provide some calcium and magnesium and trace elements. So you can see that what they're doing is they're picking and choosing different elements to create a recipe for the engineered soil. And what you want to look for when you're buying an engineered soil is something cannabis specific, because cannabis likes a slightly lower pH in the soil of around 6.5. And it also likes a lot of aeration. We talked about a lot of people overwater their plants. So if you've got a lot of perlite in there, or you've added your own perlite, that's going to be a good way to keep your plant healthy. And then you also want the right balance of nutrition, because cannabis wants a certain amount of nitrogen, potassium, etc., trace elements to make sure it stays healthy. So if you buy something cannabis specific, that's going to be uh, a really good move on your part. And then if you choose to amend that over time by adding some dry fertilizer in the top and mixing that in, or if you choose to use a bottled nutrient, um, that's going to be something that you can add. So the soil will have enough nutrient for the first month or so, or two of growth. And then after that, you want to keep the plant moving while it's in that really nutrient um, hungry stage of flower growth. And you can back that up with some nutrients or fertilizer amendments. We also have products coming out now called super soils. So that term means that it's a soil that's either sold or maybe you made it yourself, that is going to be all in one. So the idea is that all you need to do is water your soil with basically tap water that has been pH adjusted. We'll talk about that in the next couple webinars, but it's just going to be water only. So you've got soil, you add water. You still have to manage your plant and keep an eye on it, but hypothetically, it should have all the things that it needs from that soil. Um, you're also going to want to add things like a mycorrhizal inoculant to make sure that it can take advantage of all these nutrients, but it should be all in one. You may oftentimes have to add a bit more of the soil just onto the top and water it in when you've gotten to the flower stage, because the soil nutrients are only going to be um, are all going to be used up by the time you get into flower, most likely. So you can just add a bit on top and water that in, and then that'll be good to go. That would be something that I would recommend for a lot of you guys. So Sohum, for an example, shown here is a great brand. But we want to be careful to make sure that your soil has good aeration. You may want to add additional perlite. I would avoid things that are not cannabis specific. We have things like Miracle Grow, for an example, that has salt-based nutrients in it already. Even if you have some around, I'm not going to recommend that you use it. It has synthetic nutrients and things that we don't like. One of the things about cannabis-specific soil is that they've designed it to have lower levels of heavy metals and things like this, because cannabis can concentrate heavy metals. So, we want to be careful about this. We don't want to just use any soil. We want to use something that is going to be good for our plant and also good for us. Okay, so here I have, if you guys want to screenshot this or whatever, I also have, this is going to be on the take-home informational that you'll see in the following page, but Here are a bunch of Instagram and websites and YouTube places to check out. So again, the next seminar is going to cover the gear that we need, the tents, the light, the ventilation, the nutrients, what kind of nutrients I like, what I don't like, what I would recommend and what I wouldn't, and then how to use them. And then we'll also talk about flipping to flower again. And then we'll talk about some common issues like pH um, and that kind of thing. So here's your take-home pamphlet. It's this tiny URL link here, and then we'll also try to put it in the description below on YouTube. Contact me on Instagram, HoneyBearGrows. I also have a Gmail account that you can email me on if that's your preference, honeybeargrows@gmail.com. But right now, we'll jump over to the tent and take a look at our plants.
All right. So here we have our tent going on. So we have our 3 sour stomper plants here. Um, you can see I chose to grow auto flowering plants against my previous recommendation as I see some consistent, but we're getting close to chopping them. We'll see how that goes. So what we have here are these 3. So the 2 on the outside, these this plant here and this plant here, we have they're taking nectar for the gods, bottled nutrient, and then they're in cocoa coir as a medium, mixed with biochar, some mycorrhizae, and some kind of non-nutritive amendments. And then this guy in the middle that's looking really healthy here is going to be our guy that has the worm castings and the down-to-earth BioLive mixed into its cocoa mix. So this guy basically just gets water as well as compost tea, which we'll talk about. So this guy is doing really great here. The nectar for the gods guys are experiencing a little bit of a calcium deficiency that we can see here. Um, it's looking pretty rough with a calcium deficiency, but we'll get that corrected. We can see what happens is when you have 2 plants that are the same genetic, even with the same nutrient mix, sometimes you'll have, this guy has a bit more of a calcium deficiency, but has a lot larger buds, whereas this guy has smaller buds, less deficiency, um, but that's how it goes sometimes. This guy may also take longer to mature because the buds are looking smaller, but it's looking like it's on the same path to growth, but it's just a little bit delayed potentially. But these 2 on the outside were a lot smaller throughout veg. This guy in the middle tended to be a lot healthier. And what I like to do is look at the plants in profile so you can kind of see the amount of mass that you're dealing with. You can see the guy on the right has a lot less mass to it, whereas the guy in the middle has like a lot of good leaf growth. We have a decent amount of leaves to colas. We want more colas and less leaves ideally, but you can see that these are its leaves are angled upward a little bit. We call that praying, means it's really happy with the amount of light and water that it's getting. So we're in this period where these colors are getting a little bit thicker, and you can see that some of the pistils there, the hairs are going from a white color to kind of a brown color, where just like the fall leaves as they mature and kind of die off, that's going to be one thing that we'll look for when we're seeing the ripening of our buds here. We can see the sugar leaves that are providing literal sugars through photosynthesis to our buds. That'll give us a good end product. Fan leaves here. Another thing we can look at, we discussed topping today. So when we look at the plant, we can kind of see the history through its growth. So you can see that when it was very small down here, I topped it and there's a split here. Let's see. Let's get right on there. There was a split down here very early, and it caused two main branches to form. And these up on top ended up being the two biggest colas. But you can see that this plant on its own is very branchy and made a lot of side branches. But the structure I like in general. I also have a plant here that I'm growing out to be a clone mother. So this is a photoperiod plant that is just held in waiting here, but this guy was also topped. Let's see, down here, and we can see that there's a split. There was a split in the main trunk here, and that's, if you follow that up, that's going to be these two biggest tops here. So if I were to flower this out, the biggest buds would be right here and right here. But instead, I'm going to take colas. So what I'm doing here is I have a blue mat irrigation system. So this just provides water. I'll talk to you guys about that. It's something I'm testing. I can't strongly recommend it yet, but it does look promising. Anyway, that's going to be the end of webinar number 2, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, contact me on Instagram, HoneyBearGrows, if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you guys grow and follow along with how you guys are all doing. If you need any help, we'll discuss. Anyway, look forward to seeing you all on webinar number 3.